number 59. Break thou the bread of life, dear Lord, to me, as thou didst break the loaves beside us here. Beyond the sacred gate, a sleeping Lord, thy spirit hangs for me, bless thou the truth, dear Lord, to me, as thou didst bless the bread by Galilee. Then shall one day cease all pleasures lost, and Christ shall find thy peace, my all in all.
Well, we're going to have to move fast tonight because to cover Samuel, I don't know how we're going to do it, but we'll try our best. I need 3 guys to volunteer to hand out these handouts. And if you didn't pick up the lesson sheet that's out, these are all different, guys. You didn't pick up the lesson sheet out in the foyer, you might want to pick that up. They are on, should be right now. I uploaded it a while ago and checked it, and it's there. If you want it in color, you can get on the website, and it's right there. Samuel. Before we get started, let me tell you something kind of exciting. Well, when these guys find my PowerPoint. There we go. We talked about Judges last week, and so on Monday, I received a magazine, Biblical Archaeology Review. Usually not much to get excited about, but I was reading through this one, and well, that right there ought to get your attention. Jesus was found in ancient Arabia. I mean, that's kind of like something you'd see at the supermarket on one of those tabloids. But on the inside, on page 17, down in Lachish, which is southwest of Jerusalem and Hebron, at Lachish in 2019, they found this piece of pottery from a ceramic mug, and Jerubaal's name was written in it. Remember, that was the name of Gideon that his dad gave him, Jerubaal. Not a common name. So to see that one written there from the period of the Judges, the date's right, kind of an interesting find. It doesn't take much to get me excited, but that got me excited. I thought, man, we just studied about Gideon, and then I get this magazine that has this, and just kind of backs up biblical proof of the time of the Judges. So that was pretty exciting. But on to Samuel. Shimouel. The book of Samuel takes its name from one of the main characters who was the last judge of Israel, Samuel. Shimouel, remember Deuteronomy 6:4, the Shema? Hear, O Israel. Shema, hear. Well, when you see Shimouel, this first part is basically the same as Shema, heard, and El is a shortened form of God, Elohim, so you have heard by God or heard of God. You remember that's when Hannah, when God heard her prayer and Samuel was born, she named him heard of God, Shimouel. Up until the Septuagint was the Greek translation of the Old Testament, Samuel was one book. The Septuagint, when they translated into Greek, they broke it into two books. And actually, they just went ahead with Kings and broke it into two books. And so they called it the Books of Kingdoms. Books of Kingdoms. And there were four of them. 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings. Of course, they were the books of the kingdoms 1, 2, 3, and 4. If I've lost you by now, good, because I'm going to make it even worse. When the Latin Vulgate came along, they called it the books of, they didn't like kingdoms, they called it the books of kings. And so that's kind of where we got kings from that instead of kingdoms. But finally, going back to the Hebrew version, in the 16th century, this guy published a Hebrew Bible, and he broke it down into 1st and 2nd Samuel. So that was the first time the Hebrew Bible broke it down into two books. But even today, excuse me, it's known as one book. However, the Hebrew text I have in my office, the Bible, it has Shimouel Aleph and Shimouel Beit. In other words, A and B to designate first and second. They just put the first letter and the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet. I don't know, I get tied up in all that kind of stuff. And let's get to how the book opens with a man and his two wives going up to Shiloh to worship God. And Shiloh is here's Jerusalem, Dead Sea, Jordan River. Here's Shiloh. That was the place of worship right then. And so they go up there and to worship God. And you know Hannah, Eli thinks she's drunk. She's praying for a child. She's got rival problems at home. Anytime you got two wives, you got problems. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket science to figure that one out. And the other wife just gave Hannah all kinds of problems. Evidently, she was a real a bad woman and really taunted Hannah. But all we see of Hannah is a very godly woman, and she needs to be praised. If I go off a script, don't pay any attention, because there's no way we can cover all this stuff tonight. I thought you might want to go back and look at this. Have you ever tried to figure out Samuel, Kings, and then how Chronicles, how they all fit together? I thought this was a good way of explaining it, and I'll let you go back and study that a little bit, because it really does help you understand a little bit about why we have duplications in these records. And then we'll come to the outline of 1 Samuel. Wow, there's so much that happens in 1 Samuel. A lot happens in 2 Samuel, but 1 Samuel, we transition from the judges, Eli, and the last one, Samuel, to the kings, starting with King Saul. And even while King Saul is reigning as king, David is anointed as the next king. So you almost have two kings going around, and Saul is trying to kill David, but so much goes on there. We could spend the rest of the evening just talking about what a bad daddy Eli was as far as his boys go, and we want to talk just a minute about that, because he was not a good dad. And maybe as a result of that, Samuel wasn't necessarily a good daddy. But his two boys, Hophni and Phinehas, they were real scoundrels. And one of the first prophecies that Samuel gets is when he's a little boy. You remember he hears the Lord calling him, and he goes and asks Eli, said, I don't know what's going on. He said, well, finally he says, go back and listen and respond. And the prophecy that he has to relay is to Eli, his mentor. And he has to go back and tell him what the Lord's just said. For I've told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knows, because his sons made themselves vile, and he, I like the old King James, restrained them not. In fact, he let his boys get away with all kinds of stuff and didn't try to stop them. That's a message all parents need to hear. Your children are your children. You're responsible for them. And if they need restraining, you restrain them. And Eli didn't do that. And sad. Oh, me. So the Israelites get in war with the Philistines. The Philistines are encamped over here at Aphek. The children of Israel are encamped at Ebenezer. They meet in battle, and the Philistines are whipping the Israelites. Israelites say, we need some help. Let's go get the Ark of the Covenant, because God's there on the mercy seat. He resides there. Let's bring him up from Shiloh and bring him over to where we are camped and where we're in battle, and maybe we'll win. Bad choice. And old Hophni and Phinehas, they were probably involved in that, and so they went with the ark, and they get killed in battle. And the Philistines steal the Ark of the Covenant. Oh, me. Now, they're going to wish they hadn't done that, but that's kind of a funny story. But old Eli, he's an old, and he's a fat man. I mean, the text says he's a big fat man. And he's can barely see. He's sitting by the gate here at Shiloh, and they bring him news that Hophni and Phinehas have been killed in battle. But that's not what got him. If you read the text real carefully, what got him was when he found out that the Ark of the Covenant had been stolen by the Philistines, he fell backward off his seat, broke his neck, and died. But it was the Ark of the Covenant news that killed him. I don't think he was too shocked at maybe the news of his sons. The Philistines, they get the the ark. They bring it down to Ashdod, put it into the temple with their god Dagon. Dagon has a rough night. He falls off, falls down, and all this kind of stuff. And they go in, they put him back up. He keeps falling down. They say, well, we don't want to keep him. Let's send him over here to our brothers at Ekron. And they go over to Ekron, and, well, they said, why did you bring that guy here? I mean, let's get rid of him. And so they put him on a cart, and they let these cattle go on their own, and it ends up at Beth-Shemesh. And then the people at Beth-Shemesh take it on up to Kirjath-Jearim. And this is west of Jerusalem, and there the Ark of the Covenant stays. They get a priest. They name him, I think his name was Eleazar, and he has custody of the Ark. And so it stays there for quite some time. But boy, the Philistines were glad to get rid of that ark. Now it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel. This is important to read because it has to do with how the first king comes about. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba. But his sons did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain, took bribes, and perverted justice. They were like Phinehas and Hophni. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, look, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, give us a king to judge us. So Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, heed the voice of the people and all that they say to you. For they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. According to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day with which they have forsaken me, and served other gods, so they're doing to you also. Now therefore heed their voice, however you shall solemnly forewarn them and show them the behavior of the king who will reign over them. As you may remember, that they chose Saul to be the next king. The Lord kind of made the choice for him, but it was a man like they would pick because he was a good-looking guy and he stood shoulders and head above anybody else. He was a big, tall man. Always remember that about Saul, how big he was, when you talk about little David killing Goliath. Just always remember that. He was Saul's armor bearer. He wasn't some little boy. I mean, it makes good VBS and Bible class stories. But David, when he killed Goliath, was not a little old boy. He was a grown man. He was big enough to have worn Saul's armor. And that tells you how big he was. So Saul was a big man. David was a large guy too when he was in service to Saul. Oh me. So Saul becomes king. And really, when you start off with Saul, he's a pretty good guy. He was of the tribe of Benjamin. They were a small tribe, but Saul was a pretty good guy. You read about how he goes trying to find their donkeys that had been lost, he and one of the servants, and they end up finding Samuel and getting anointed, and then finally he is formally installed as king. And Saul lives down here at Gibeah. But one of the first things he did, one of these Ammonites comes up to the city of Jabesh Gilead, and he says, we want you to be our servants. We're going to punch your right eyes out, and you're going to serve us. And they said, whoa, that doesn't sound too good. We think we need will you give us a little time to see if we can get some help? They said, okay, we'll give you a day or two. They send some messengers down to Gibeah to Saul. Now, he's the brand new king. He's out plowing. I mean, you figure. And Saul gathers an army, and he takes his army, and he goes over here and whips this guy and defeats the Ammonites, pushes them back. You think these people are thankful for Saul? You better believe it. They kept their eyeballs, kept their sight, kept their lives, and they weren't servants of the Ammonites. So just always remember the story of the people at Jabesh Gilead. Very, very important in this story. I have no idea where I am in this text, but I'll keep going. I'll find it in a minute. Oh, yes. So we get down to Saul messes up. He really messes up. We'll start here. And Samuel said to Saul, "You have done foolishly." This is where Saul is about to be attacked, and he was afraid. Samuel hadn't showed up at the appointed time, and so Saul takes it upon himself to act like a priest and make sacrifice. So Samuel said to Saul, "You have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For now the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought for himself a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be commander over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. The Lord has sought for himself a man after his own heart." Oh, me. So Samuel said, "Has the Lord..." Now we get to where he was supposed to wipe out the Amalekites and King Agag. He didn't do it. And he blames it on the people. They brought all these sacrifices, animals back to sacrifice. And then the great statement. So Samuel said, "Has the Lord his great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifice, as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, to hearken than the fat of ram." I learned it from the old King James, to hearken, and to heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. That's a good one to teach your children if they're stubborn. But they usually get it from their parents. I don't know why. Because you've rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king. So Saul is on his way out. He is on his way out. And Samuel is sent on a secret mission, basically down to Bethlehem, to the house of Jesse, who has 8 boys. And the Lord tells him, says, "You don't look as men see. The Lord looks at the heart." And so you'll remember that as he's seeing these boys pass by, and they're tall and good looking. None of them are the one till they get to the little boy who's out tending the sheep. But again, the important thing is it's do not look at the appearance or the physical stature, because the Lord looks at the heart. And what I did, I went down through and I tried to pick passages that would help us understand. I'm going to get strung out, but it's okay, because I get to tell 2 of my favorite stories here. This is where I want us to go in Israel. Remember, we went to En-Gedi. Anybody here that, yeah, there's some people that went with us to En-Gedi. And they took us, and we saw this little waterfall down in a bunch of rocks. If we'd have taken 30 more minutes, we'd have gone up in through this jungle up to this beautiful pool, and there's a cave behind this big high waterfall, possibly where David cut the corner of the robe off of King Saul. Beautiful, beautiful place in Gedi. I think it's because we didn't have a Hebrew guide. I don't think he really wanted to go up there, because this is good Hebrew history. It's not Christian history, which he was focused on. But anyway, En Gedi, what a beautiful place. And but David's words, when he had the chance to kill King Saul, and he had more than one occasion, but this was really the first one. And afterwards, he has a conversation with King Saul. Look, this day your eyes have seen that the Lord delivered you today into my hand in the cave, and someone urged me to kill you. But my eyes spared you, and I said, I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. I think that's a passage that has a lot of importance, and one that's well worth remembering. Here's my second favorite story, Beit Shan. Down here are the ruins of a Roman city from about the 2nd to the 4th century A.D. It would have been there shortly after the time of Christ. But this big mound up here is what was originally the city of Beit Shan, up on a hill. First time I went to Israel, this was just a big old grassy mound. There was no construction, nothing. They had not touched it. The second time I went, they had these big steps, like railroad ties that they had put up, that you had to step up about this high. And this little, my Japanese friend from Hawaii, Matsui, I don't know how she made those steps, but she did. I mean, that little short lady, she made those steps. But we were able to walk up to the top. This time, now they have some nice steps. I was in AFib while I was there. I had a heart monitor on, but I was determined I was going to get to the top of Beit Shan again, and I did. It's just, this story is just something else. About 5 miles west of here, at Mount Gilboa, Saul and his sons were in a fight with the Philistines, and they're all killed. Well, 3 boys, and Saul is mortally wounded, and he wants to fall on his sword because he knows that the Philistines will make it miserable, so he wants to kill himself and commit suicide. The Philistines come to gather the bodies up. They find the king and his 3 sons, and they bring them over here to this garrison of theirs at Beit Shan. They've cut Saul's head off, and they hang the bodies of Saul and his sons on the walls of Beit Shan. Remember those guys from Jabesh Gilead? They didn't forget. And when they heard what had happened, they came from across the Jordan at night without stopping, and they crossed the Jordan, and they come and they climb this hill, and it's quite a hill at Beit Shan, especially if they're coming from down from the Jordan River and coming up. It's quite a journey. And they climb the hill and get to the walls of Beit Shan, take the bodies of Saul and his 3 sons, and they take them back to Jabesh Gilead and give them a decent burial. if we could get so wrapped up and excited, I'm not usually a good guy for excitement, but I can get excited about Engedi. I can get excited about Sean. Folks, if we could get excited about Scripture like this, oh, it'd be wonderful. But see, you can't calm me down when we're talking about these two places. There'll probably be some others in this class, but these two stories, this is a military story. This is a special operations mission that the men of Jabesh Gilead did that night. And so that has my attention also. So we've got, 3 minutes to do 2 Samuel? Whew. David. What can you say about David? We know David. He started off rough. Ishbosheth was the son of Saul. They made him king over Israel. However, they did it east of the Jordan. David is king over Judah. We get to a point. Now there was this is in chapter 3. Now there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. But David grew stronger and stronger, and the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker. Ishbosheth was murdered, and finally the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah were merged, and the kingdom was united, and David was king. He reigned 7.5 years in Hebron, and then he moved his capital to Jerusalem after defeating the Jebusites and capturing the citadel of Zion, and it became the city of David. Here's another way of looking at the thing, how he starts off winning and becoming the king of all, conquered a lot of territory, and then his sin with Bathsheba, and has trouble in his whole household. Just not a good thing. But one thing I want us to remember is if we try to look at passages, probably the one that's most memorable is after his sin with Bathsheba, Nathan the prophet comes and tells him the story of the poor man and his little ewe lamb, and David gets so upset about it, but then always remember what Nathan said, "You are the man." And David took that well. That was why David was a man after God's own heart. Because when he found out he was wrong, he did something about it. Read Psalm 51, beautiful, penitent psalm of his sin with Bathsheba. What else? This purple, that was Saul's kingdom. Not much territory. Take the green, and that's David's territory. There's a little thin line. It goes up here, the little blue line. Solomon's kingdom extended all of that. But David had to fight to get all of that green territory and expand Saul's kingdom. So he was a man of war. He wanted to build God a house. God said, "No, your son can do it, but you can't. But I'll do something better. I'll give you a house that'll stand forever." What a beautiful story. 2 Samuel. Comments? Whew, I'm worn out. But I loved it. I loved every minute of this one. Next week, we'll hit the kingdoms or kings. And hope you'll be back. Thank you. And the bell should have rung, shouldn't it?